let's get started here. I want to go around this first question about, in terms of brass and reed instruments and women previously not really being accepted in those roles. Claire, when you decided to play the baritone sax, was there any resistance from family, friends, whatever, about playing what was seemingly up to that point a male-dominated instrument?
Oddly enough, no. I had a very supportive father who, when I showed interest in playing an instrument and wanted to join the band, he started coming home with concert tickets in New York City, you know, to Duke Ellington and Count Basie and big band things and, you know, all kinds of jazz concerts. So he was actually very supportive of it, and I think my friends didn't really think twice about it. But, you know, that was in the 70s. That wasn't really in the beginning of the music. But I was fortunate. I was surrounded with supportive people.
What about you, Kiku? When you started to play the trumpet, I know that there was music in your family. Were your family members and your friends supportive of this journey?
Well, my brother played trumpet, and I don't think anybody really thought I would take to it. You know, I was the gymnast, and I think people assumed I would be a jock or a housewife, or, you know, like, like those were my two choices. And so when they made us pick an instrument, I picked the trumpet, and, you know, they told me, well, that's not a girl's instrument. I said, but we have one, so my mom said I have to play it. And I don't know that anybody actually encouraged me or discouraged me. It just happened. It just happened.
And what about you, Elizabeth? Why the trombone, and any resistance or concerns when you decided on that path?
Yeah, no, not at all. Because my dad actually is a trombone player. Like Claire, I had a really supportive dad, and like Kiku, I had another musician in my family. So I was drawn to the trombone. It wasn't a weird thing. It was always just something, you know, all the instruments seemed available. I guess it didn't really occur to me to play the drums, you know, something maybe that would have been a stretch, but I think that my parents would have still been supportive. I think I felt resistance much later. I think it was very fine for me to be, you know, a 10-year-old just starting out, but as I got more serious, there was more resistance from society.
Well, Angeleisha, I see you shaking your head there. Have you encountered some resistance?
Yeah, much like Elizabeth said, much later. I mean, earlier on, you know, I was very supportive. My family is very rooted in the church, so that's how I got my start in music. And my grandfather and my grandmother, very supportive. I grew up in a little small town, so it was like, okay, yeah, let her play. You know, it's great. But as Elizabeth said, later in life is when I started incurring resistance.
Well, tell me about that resistance. Were people reluctant to hire you, just reluctant to listen to you play because you're a woman? What did you encounter?
Well, for me, it happened in my academic career. Is when I started to encounter a little bit, and I think it was more of the thing where it was sort of like I was being tested to see how serious I was, you know, in comparison to the guys that were playing. So it's like, okay, let's see what she's made of type of thing, you know, not really a bashing, but more of a, like I said, like, let's see what she's made of. Let's see if she's really gonna do this or has what it takes type of thing.
Claire, you've been a long-term resident of New York City, where there are cutting contests and a certain competition. Did you find you had to prove yourself initially?
Yeah, I think you still have, I think you always have to prove yourself. I think there's a wealth of players, you know, male and female, that are really great players, and it doesn't really stop. But yes, I certainly think that the initial assumption professionally seems to be you're expected to maybe not be as strong a player if you're a female. That's my impression. That's sort of the initial. Now, I think that might be changing generationally. I think there's so many young women players that are just burning that I think that's evening out. I certainly hope so. But yeah, certainly back then, I mean, I definitely showed up for rehearsals, you know, to sub for somebody or to do something, and people said, no chicks in the band. I've heard it. So, yeah, that it happened sometimes, and it was kind of assumed, you know, that you were a second-class citizen or not as good or something.
Kiku, have you experienced any resistance, the fact that the trumpet is known as a power instrument, and people say, well, can a woman do that? Have you had any experience with that?
I find that the further my career, you know, grows, the less resistance I get. I feel like, you know, it's interesting too, because people always worry, oh, am I good enough for this gig that I got hired for? And they're hiring you for you. And I think in some ways, instrumentalists are not being quite stereotyped as much by the instrument itself. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it still happens, but it's really more about you with the instrument. You're like, what is it about that combination that these people who are hiring you want? So I feel like people are really hiring me for me rather than, oh, I have this trumpet player's name. I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. You know? So it's getting a lot better, which is always good to be moving in a positive direction.